I am really glad I slept in the Jeep last night. Last night around 2 a.m., there was a totally insane thunderstorm. I have never seen a thunderstorm with such frequency and intensity of lightning bolts being cast down to the earth. It was like a strobe light at times. The lightning was just happening so much. I felt really bad for the people in the tents in the campground. It also rained very hard. I was very glad I was in the car and not in my little tent. It's just before sunrise, and I've come back to the door area because I didn't get to see the door last night before the sun went down, and I was really hungry, so I just left to go eat dinner. So I'm gonna go see the door for sunrise, and then I'm gonna hike the castle trail this morning. What a beautiful viewpoint, definitely worth seeing. I'm on the castle trail. It's about 8:20 a.m. My goal is to see if I can hike the whole thing end to end before it gets too hot. First chunk of the trail complete. I've gone 1.4 miles so far in less than an hour, which is good progress for trying to get out of here before the sun gets too hot. Now I'm technically on the Medicine Route Trail. It connects in a loop with the Castle Trail, and I'm going to do the castle on the way back. This trail goes through some very classic prairie landscape. The visitor center at Badlands had a quote from Willa Cather on the wall, which I thought was a really nice touch. It was from My Antonia, which is her classic novel of prairie life as pioneers. I read it in college, and to be honest, it didn't make a really big impression on me. It was not one of my favorites, but I have a friend, shout out to my friend who Willa Cather is one of her favorite authors, so she's definitely worth reading. She's known for writing about the Midwestern landscape and life. This landscape is really fascinating. The juxtaposition of the prairie with rock formations that look like something out of canyon country. So unusual. It's getting hotter. I changed into my long sleeve shirt. I took off the bottom layer so I don't have that on because that was just getting too hot. Put my hat on and it feels good. It's actually nice how cool the hat makes your head feel. I just almost face planted in this mud puddle. I really like some of Edith Wharton's work, in particular The Age of Innocence. That's an amazing novel. I've read it a couple times. But even though she's such a good writer, her novels are just so depressing. There's like no redemption. They're just really a downer to read. The Age of Innocence, even though it sort of ends in disappointment, is actually not as depressing as some of her other novels. It like makes me concerned for her, even though she's not currently alive anymore. The most recent one I read was The Custom of the Country, which is about this social climbing woman who just kind of cruelly discards people along the way who she uses. And it was just really sad. You're not really rooting for the female protagonist because she's just such a horrible person. And it just was not very fun to read, honestly. Even though it was a good and well-written and interesting book, I don't really love novels that are just all negative all the time. I prefer novels where the novelist has a more full view of life, because even though things are terrible a lot of the time and things can be really sad and very tragic, I also think, there's humor and there's beauty, and I like novels that incorporate those as well. Something I do admire about Edith Wharton is she was a member of the very wealthy and sort of socialite set. She actually had a home, one of those Newport mansions, and Newport features in The Age of Innocence. I think it's so impressive that as a wealthy woman, she was able to step back from her milieu and look at it critically and became this really important literary figure in a time when there were not a lot of women writers. And she was an early winner of the Pulitzer Prize as a woman, which is really impressive. I admire that. She also really loved interior design, and her home, which you can visit in Western Massachusetts, is just beautiful. It's interesting to me when authors have different interests outside of literature. I've made it to the junction with Saddle Pass and the last little chunk of the Castle Trail, so I'm going to go finish up that Castle Trail. There's the parking lot behind me, so this is officially my halfway point. I'm going to rest a little bit before I turn around. I'm headed back now. This half of the hike is definitely going to be more difficult for me because now the sun is quite high and it is very hot. The weather is supposed to be in the 70s today, so I mean it's not terrible, but I'm just really sensitive to heat, so I need to be careful. I'm walking a little slower. Also, if I do start to feel bad, I'm just going to sit in the shade behind one of these cliffs and wait for the sun to go down a bit. So I think it'll be okay. I have 2 liters of water left. I brought in 3. I'm just gonna take it easy. There's also a really nice breeze blowing and that helps. I want to try to push myself on this a little bit because hiking in the hot sun is one of my serious weaknesses. As always with hiking, it's like a fine line between pushing yourself a little bit and not doing something that's actually dangerous. I'm just gonna be really aware of how I'm feeling and not try to go too fast. My pace will definitely be slower for this half of the hike. I'm back at this trail junction. Let's go check out Saddle Pass while I'm here. That's a fun and scenic little section of the trail. It's very steep though, so I definitely wouldn't recommend it if you are afraid of heights. They also say on the sign, don't do it if you have any ankle trouble, which I think is accurate because there's a lot of loose dirt. And it was actually a little bit hard to find the trail. I got off the trail at one point, so you do have to be careful, but it's cool and it has some very beautiful kind of representative rocks of the Badlands landscape. It's noon and it is so hot. I'm just gonna rest for a few minutes under this shady rock and then see how I'm feeling, if I want to rest longer and wait until the sun goes down a little or head back slowly. We'll see. I was over optimistic about making it back before it got too hot. It's so hot right now, so I am going to sit here and relax. I'm going to eat my lunch. I wish I brought a book to read or something, but of course I thought I was going to be back before lunch, so I don't have anything to read. I'm just going to sit here and watch the clouds. It's better than getting a heat stroke. My lunch is a packet of tuna mixed with 1 packet of mayo and Triscuits. Often I would also mix it with olive oil and some spices, but I didn't have time to do that for this trip. I also had some peanut butter cups, but they have completely melted. It makes them seem less appealing. While I'm sitting here, here's the route I did today. So I parked here. I did the Door Trail, walked this 1.4 mile segment of the Castle Trail, connected to Medicine Route, 2 miles, 1.8 out to the end of the Castle Trail. Came back, went down Saddle Pass. So now I have to go back up Saddle Pass and complete these 2 segments to get back. It'll be about 10.4 miles total. It's really not that bad because it's flat, except it's just the heat that's kind of the challenge here for me. My heat tolerance is so low. When I was in the Grand Canyon, I was like, oh, this is so hot. And this guy from Arizona was like, what are you talking about? It's like too cold. I've tried to improve my heat tolerance. Like I've tried to exercise more when it's hot out, and I don't know, it just doesn't really seem to be working. One of my worst backpacking experiences ever featured being in the heat, and I think I'll tell that story in its own video. It's around 2 p.m., so the sun is a little bit past its most intense point, and I am now hiking back. I think it was the right thing to do. At the bottom of Saddleback, I started to feel sleepy, which for me is a sign of heat sickness coming on. So I think it was good that I stopped and just rested while the sun was really intense during that hour between noon to 1. I have about 3 miles to go, so should be fine now. One of the most surprising things about this landscape to me is the many mud pits. Like, I've been squelching through a lot of mud. Cars up ahead means just 1.4 miles left to go. Last night I continued in my reading of Thoreau. I'm still in that first economy section where basically he's just bragging about how little his house cost and how little his food cost and how he's really happy living this very minimalist life. It really does strike me how similar it is to the FIRE movement and like Mr. Money Mustache, where it's like, okay, if you can get your expenses down, if you can be very frugal, then you need less money to live on and you don't have to work so much. So it's kind of interesting to see that that concept has actually been around for a while. I didn't really realize that Thoreau was doing it first. I mean, maybe not first. I don't know if there were earlier examples examples, but long before any of this seemingly recent talk, with the fire movement, I love the idea of it. I wish I could emulate him and just like eat cheap food and get rid of all my, well, he doesn't really seem to get rid of his possessions. It seems like he never really had much possessions in the first place, but he's happy to not have possessions. And part of me really wishes I could be like that. I wish I could live this really frugal, basic life. And I want to like get rid of all my stuff, and I would love to try the van life, but part of me is like really attached to my material possessions, which feels shallow. I'm sort of ashamed of this consumerist streak that I have. I don't think I'm a consumer in that I buy lots of new stuff all the time, but it does seem like I'm always buying things. I do a lot of secondhand shopping. I feel like there's just two sides to me. There's one side that like wishes I could be this minimalist, anti-consumer person, and then the other side is a hedonist and really wants to own beautiful things. As shallow as it sounds, like they do bring me joy. I love having clothes that I really love and like pieces of artwork that I think look really nice in my apartment. And I wish I could just stop buying things, but it's actually really hard. You read a lot of these van life stories and it's like, okay, we sold all of our stuff. And I was thinking about it. I was like, okay, realistically, could I do that? And I was like, I don't think I could bear to sell some of my stuff. I just love it too much. But on the other hand, one of the happiest periods of my life was in 2016. I was in between jobs because we were moving between states. I took basically a year off to travel. I wasn't actually traveling for the whole year. I traveled for like 3 months, lived out of my car, and that was one of the happiest times of my life. And I was really struck afterward. I was like, wow, I really didn't miss any of my stuff. Like I didn't need it. That experience is something that I think about a lot. I'd like to replicate that experience again. On the other hand, I was in my 20s, so I hadn't really accumulated a lot of stuff that I like actually cared about, whereas now I feel like I have. As I mentioned in the video about my ridiculous book collection, I have a collector's instinct. I like to collect stuff, and it's been something that I've really had to fight against, actually. As crazy as it sounds to people, because usually they come into my apartment and they're like, oh man, you have so many books, or like, you have a lot of stuff. The scary thing is like, that's actually the improved version. Like, I used to be worse. It's hard because I think Thoreau and other people who have similar criticisms of consumerism, they're right. Your possessions can become a trap, and there is in our culture this pressure to just keep buying more and more. Thoreau definitely kind of has this annoying, somewhat aggressive tone, which hilariously I think is still similar to some of the kind of fire discourse today. He's basically, bragging about how he's gotten his costs so low that he can be very, very frugal to afford this tiny little shack. But then I'm just kind of thinking like, okay, I mean, it's great for you because you're a single dude, but what about people who have families, who have children, who have to take care of other people? It's more difficult if you're in that situation. It's not so easy for everyone. He's also starting from a place where he already had resources. I was forced to read Walden in high school, and I remembered absolutely nothing of it, which is why I'm attempting to reread it. Now, though, it strikes me as really odd that we read it in high school, because basically it's this guy complaining about how the social order of consumerism and being employed to support your consumerism doesn't make sense. And it's interesting to me that we would read that in high school, because I personally feel that the purpose of high school is to kind of, I'm not sure if brainwash is the right word. As far as I can tell, the purpose of high school and primary education in general is to instill conformity, which is interesting because they actually do sort of pay lip service to this idea that you should be an independent thinker and whatever, but that's not really what they teach you. There's this unspoken message that it's not good to be different. So it seems odd that they would have Walden as a reading, because it actually is pretty subversive. And even Thoreau describes himself as having crooked genius. I really liked that phrase. So I used to rail against how in high school it was like, it's not good to be different. It's not good to be too good at anything. You're really not supposed to stick out or just be different at all. We're unique. I don't endorse this because I don't like it, but I think it does have a social purpose. It's basically a finishing school to turn you into an obedient and mediocre resident employee and consumer who doesn't question too much. That's the most important thing above all. It feels like consumerism really is the true religion of America. You can't question it. If you do, you're anti-growth, anti-economy, anti-all things good American. And to some extent, it really is countercultural to be like, okay, but should I even want these things? He was also sort of a proto-vegetarian, because he talks about how his neighbors are like, oh, there's no way you you're not eating meat, which is funny because that's also like the other, probably one of the top American taboos is you don't question the meat industry, the practice of eating meat. Vegetarians are looked upon with suspicion. Every now and then an article comes out about how high school valedictorians are actually not people to admire because they are only good at following rules and being conformists, and they just follow the rules that the system sets down for them, and they're not actually creative thinkers or whatever. And it kind of haunts my soul because I was the valedictorian of my high school. I don't think I'm a conformist. I think I'm kind of unusual in a lot of ways, or at least I like to think I am. Maybe I'm not, but I am kind of a rule follower, and I don't like that about myself necessarily. I think it makes life easier in some ways, but I also kind of wish that I didn't have this like strong urge to follow the rules. I actually really disliked school, which is something that people don't understand about me because they're like, oh, if you're good at it, you must like it. No, I really disliked it, but I sort of saw it as like, okay, this is a game that I have to play to like get to a good place in life, which may or may not be true. I'm less convinced of that as time goes on. It's something that I think about a lot. And then sometimes I'm like, what would my life be like if I weren't such a rule follower? Which brings me to another novel. The Trader Beru Cormorant is, I guess it's a fantasy novel. Super interesting book. It's set in this imaginary civilization where the female protagonist is a member of an oppressed minority group. Basically, the struggle is that she decides to enter the civil service of the imperialists as she rises through the ranks. Her goal is to undermine the system that these people have set up. But the tricky part is, does she keep following, or at least pretending to follow the rules to rise higher in the system to gain more power so that eventually she can undermine it better, but at the same time, she's fighting against her own values and her own culture. It reflects the things that people who are oppressed have to deal with. It's a really interesting novel about imperialism and the tragedy of that. At the same time, I think it also sort of metaphorically parallels what it's like to be an individual in a society where you don't necessarily want to be part of the game, but you are a part of it, and you have to play by the rules in order to get enough power and privilege to either have a decent life or to be able to make any kind of meaningful change. And at what point do you continue to play by the rules so that you continue to amass privilege and power versus when do you decide like, okay, I'm not going to play anymore? And it's a struggle that I think everyone to some extent probably faces, probably some more than others, depending on how aligned your personality or your family or your culture is with the external society or the part of the society that has the power. How much do you suppress the truth of who you are to get along externally? All right, between Castle Trail out and back, plus Saddle Pass, plus the Door Trail, plus running back and forth to get my camera, I think I hiked about 11 miles today. Feels good. A day spent outside is a good day.